I was halfway through my property line when I heard the sirens, which was strange because the only thing I'd done wrong that morning was forget to add cream to my coffee before heading out on my snow machine. My name is Vincent Ingram, and I've lived on my 40-acre property in Fairbanks, Alaska, for the better part of 15 years. I bought this land back in 2011 when property was still affordable, and the only neighbors I had were moose and the occasional fox. Life was simple. I worked as a heavy equipment operator for the local mining company, maintained my property during the summers, and spent my winters riding my snow machine across the vast white expanse that stretched behind my cabin. The subdivision showed up 3 years ago. Mountain Ridge Estates, they called it. Some developer from Anchorage bought the adjacent land and started putting up these cookie-cutter homes that all looked the same. Gray siding, white trim, perfectly manicured yards that would be buried under snow for 8 months of the year anyway. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. My property was my property, and as long as they stayed on their side of the fence, I figured we could coexist peacefully. I was wrong. The sirens grew louder as I brought my snow machine to a stop near my storage shed. 2 police cruisers were making their way down my long driveway, their lights flashing blue and red against the morning snow. I killed the engine and pulled off my helmet, my breath forming clouds in the negative 20-degree air. Officer Martinez was the first one out of his vehicle. I knew him from the local bar where we both occasionally grabbed a beer after work. He looked uncomfortable, his hand resting on his duty belt but not in a threatening way, more like he wasn't quite sure why he was here. "Vincent," he said, nodding at me. "We got a call about trespassing and property damage." I blinked. "Trespassing? I'm on my own land." The second officer, a younger guy I didn't recognize, was already walking around my snow machine like it was a crime scene. He crouched down, examining the tracks behind it. "Madam, please stay in your vehicle," Martinez said, and I turned to see a silver Lexus SUV had followed the police cruisers up my driveway. The driver's side door was already open, and a woman in her late 40s was marching toward us like she owned the place. She was wearing a purple North Face jacket that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and her blonde hair was styled in that specific way that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." "Officers, that's him," she shouted, pointing at me with a manicured finger. "That's the man who destroyed our community property." Martinez held up a hand. "Mrs. Carson, I asked you to wait in your vehicle." "I will not wait in my vehicle while this criminal stands here acting innocent." Her voice had that particular pitch that made my teeth hurt. "He drove that monstrosity right through our neighborhood park, tearing up the landscaping and terrifying the residents." I stared at her. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been riding on my property same as I do every morning." "Your property?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That park is part of Mountain Ridge Estates. It's maintained by our homeowners association, of which I am the president. You had no right to be there." "Lady, I don't know who you are or what park you're talking about, but I haven't left my property." I gestured to the tree line behind me. "I ride the same route every morning. Has been my route for 15 years. The younger officer stood up. "Sir, we have multiple witnesses who saw you drive through the community park at approximately 7:15 this morning." I checked my watch. It was 7:45. "I did ride through the back section of my property around that time, yeah, but it's my land." "It absolutely is not your land." The woman, Mrs. Carson apparently, was getting red in the face. "That park was built 2 years ago as part of our community amenities. We have the deed, we have the permits, and we have security footage of you destroying property that cost our HOA over $50,000 to install." Martinez looked between us, clearly trying to figure out what was actually going on. "Vincent, do you have documentation showing where your property line is?" "Of course I do. It's all filed with the county." I pulled off my gloves. "Come inside, I'll show you." "We don't need to see anything," Mrs. Carson interjected. "I have all the documentation right here." She pulled out her phone, tapping aggressively at the screen. "The park boundaries are clearly marked on the HOA maps." "HOA maps aren't legal property surveys," I said, trying to keep my voice level. I'd dealt with difficult people before, but something about this woman was already getting under my skin. "The county records show exactly where my property ends." "Officers, are you going to arrest him or not?" Mrs. Carson demanded. Martinez shook his head. "Madam, we need to establish the facts first. If there's a dispute about property lines, that's not a criminal matter unless we can prove intentional trespassing." "Intentional? He does this every morning." "Every single morning we have to listen to that awful machine roaring through our peaceful neighborhood, through my property," I corrected. We all trudged into my cabin, tracking snow across the floor. I kept my important documents in a fireproof safe in my office, which was really just a corner of my living room with a desk and a filing cabinet. While I dug out my property deed and survey maps, Mrs. Carson made pointed comments about the state of my home. "Do you even have a permit for this structure?" she asked, wrinkling her nose at my wood-burning stove. "Built it myself in 2011, all permitted and inspected," I said without looking at her. I found the documents I needed and spread them out on my kitchen table. "Here. This is the original survey from when I purchased the property." Martinez leaned over the table, studying the map. The survey clearly showed my property extending in an irregular shape, with a long section that jutted eastward into what was now Mountain Ridge Estates. "This shows your property line extending pretty far east," Martinez observed. "That's because of the easement," I explained. "The original landowner, guy named Robert Chen, granted an easement through that section for access to the back 40. When I bought the place, the easement came with it. It's 20 feet wide and runs for about a quarter mile." Mrs. Carson snatched the paper off the table. "This is dated 2011. It's obviously outdated." "Property surveys don't expire," I said, my patience wearing thin. "That's the legal boundary of my land." "Let me see what I have," she said, pulling out a folder from her oversized purse. She slapped down a different map, this one clearly printed from a computer, and showing the layout of Mountain Ridge Estates. In full color, it showed neat rows of houses, streets, and a large green space labeled Community Park and Recreation Area. The problem was immediately obvious. The park was sitting right on top of where my easement should be. Martinez saw it too. "Mrs. Carson, do you have the original survey that was done before the development was built?" "I have everything the HOA was given when we took over management of the property. The developer assured us all permits and surveys were properly filed." "Who was the developer?" I asked. "Northland Properties Group out of Anchorage," she said. "And they're a very reputable company. They would never make this kind of mistake." The younger officer, whose name tag read Kowalski, had been quiet up until now. "It looks like there might be a genuine dispute about the property boundaries here. This isn't really something we can resolve." Martinez nodded. "He's right. Vincent, if you have an easement through that area and they built on it without your permission, that's a civil matter. You'd need to take it up with the HOA and probably get a lawyer involved." "A lawyer?" Mrs. Carson's voice went up an octave. "He's the one who should get a lawyer. He destroyed our property." "If he has a legal right to use that land, then he didn't destroy anything illegally," Martinez said carefully. "Look, I suggest you both get your documentation together and maybe talk to the county planning office. They can clarify where the actual property lines are." "This is ridiculous," Mrs. Carson grabbed her map and folder, shoving them back into her purse. "I'm calling our HOA attorney immediately. You'll be hearing from us, Mr. Ingram." She stormed out of my cabin, slamming the door hard enough to make my coffee mugs rattle on their hooks. After the police left, I sat at my kitchen table and really studied my property documents. The easement was clear as day. It was described in precise legal terms, with coordinates and measurements that matched exactly with my memory of where I'd been riding that morning. The path I took every day ran right through the middle of what Mountain Ridge Estates had apparently decided was their community park. I made myself a fresh pot of coffee and called my friend Derek, who worked at the Fairbanks North Star Borough Planning Office. We'd gone to high school together, and he'd helped me navigate the permit process when I built my cabin. "Derek, it's Vincent. I need a favor." "Sure, what's up?" I explained the situation, and he let out a low whistle. "Man, that's a mess. Let me pull up the records." "What's the parcel number for Mountain Ridge Estates?" I gave him the information I could see on Mrs. Carson's map, and I heard him typing on his computer. "Okay, yeah, I'm looking at it now. So Mountain Ridge Estates was approved for development in 2019. The plat shows, oh boy." "What?" "The plat shows the park area, but there's no mention of any existing easements on the property. That should have been flagged during the approval process." "Should have been?" "Yeah. Easements are supposed to be disclosed and either maintained or legally vacated before new development can proceed. If your easement was filed with the county, which it looks like it was back in 1987, then it should have shown up in the title search. So what does that mean?" "It means somebody screwed up, big time. Either the developer's title company missed it, or they saw it and decided to ignore it, or the county dropped the ball during the approval process. Probably a combination. But if your easement is valid and was never legally terminated, then yeah, they built on your legal right-of-way." I rubbed my face. "Great. You're going to need a lawyer, Vince. This is going to get complicated." He wasn't wrong. I spent the rest of the day making calls, and by evening I had an appointment scheduled with an attorney named Patricia Holden who specialized in property law. Her office was in downtown Fairbanks, and she could see me the following afternoon. That night, my phone started ringing. The first call was from a number I didn't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. Mrs. Carson's voice screeched through the speaker. "Mr. Ingram, this is Wendy Carson, president of the Mountain Ridge Estates HOA. Our attorney has reviewed the situation and determined that your claims are baseless. The park is legally owned by the HOA, and you are hereby ordered to cease all trespassing immediately. If you continue to violate our property rights, we will pursue legal action to the fullest extent of the law. Furthermore, you will be receiving an invoice for the damage you caused to our landscaping, irrigation system, and decorative stonework. The total comes to $12,400. We expect payment within 30 days. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. The next morning, I intentionally rode my Snowmachine through the same route. If it was my legal easement, I had every right to use it. When I reached the area where the park had been built, I slowed down to really look at what they'd done. It was actually pretty elaborate. They'd installed a playground with swings and slides, park benches, a gazebo, and a network of decorative stone pathways. Young trees had been planted, though they were currently just sticks poking up through the snow. The whole thing was probably very nice in the summer, but right now it was mostly buried under 2 feet of powder. My Snowmachine tracks from the day before were still visible, cutting right through the middle of it all. I followed the same path, careful not to hit any of the permanent structures. The easement was 20 feet wide, which gave me plenty of room to navigate without actually damaging anything. The tracks in the snow weren't exactly damage in any legal sense, but I could see how it upset the HOA's pristine vision of their community space. As I rode through, I noticed faces in the windows of the nearby houses, people watching, probably wondering what the crazy man on the loud machine was doing tearing through their park. When I reached the far end of the easement and returned to the undeveloped section of my property, I glanced back and saw Wendy Carson standing in the park, phone held up, clearly recording me. Fine. Let her record. I wasn't doing anything illegal. My meeting with Patricia Holden was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, which gave me time to shower, change into clean clothes that didn't smell like gasoline and wood smoke, and grab lunch at a local diner. I brought all my property documents in a folder, along with printouts of the messages and photos that Wendy Carson had started posting to the Mountain Ridge Estates Facebook group. Patricia's office was in a renovated building downtown, the kind with exposed brick walls and modern furniture that tried to look rustic. She was in her mid-50s, with short gray hair and sharp eyes that immediately put me at ease. She looked like someone who knew her stuff and didn't waste time. "Mr. Ingram, please sit down." She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Tell me what's going on." I laid out the whole story, starting with my morning ride 2 days ago and ending with the voicemail demanding $12,000. She took notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Do you have the original easement document? I have a copy that was included when I bought the property. The original should be filed with the county." "Good. I'll need to see that, and I'll pull the county records to confirm everything. But based on what you're telling me, you have a very strong case. Easements don't just disappear because someone builds on them. The HOA and the developer had a legal obligation to identify any existing easements before construction. So what do I do? First, don't pay them a penny. Second, keep using your easement exactly as you have been. Don't let them bully you into giving up your legal rights. Third, let me handle all communication with them from this point forward. Don't answer their calls, don't respond to their messages. Everything goes through me. They said they're going to sue me. Patricia smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. Let them. If they want to file a lawsuit, we'll countersue for harassment, and we'll demand they remove all structures from your easement. Trust me, once their attorney actually reviews the title history, they're going to realize they're in a very bad position. What about the developer? Northland Properties. That's where this gets interesting. If the developer sold them property without disclosing your easement, the HOA might have a claim against the developer. But that's not your problem. Your problem is making sure your rights are protected. I hired her on the spot. Her retainer was $3,000, which hurt, but I'd been saving money for years and had a decent cushion in my bank account. She assured me that if this went the way she thought it would, I might be able to recover legal fees from the HOA. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. Patricia sent a formal letter to the Mountain Ridge Estates, HOA, along with copies of my easement documentation, explaining that I had a legal right to use the path through their park, and that any structures built on the easement were there at their own risk. The HOA responded with their own letter, again demanding payment for damages and insisting that my easement claim was invalid. Their attorney, a guy named Robert Finch from a firm in Anchorage, argued that the easement had been abandoned because I hadn't formally recorded my use of it with the county. Patricia laughed when she read that. That's not how easements work. You don't have to record every single time you use your legal right-of-way. The easement exists whether you use it every day or once a year. But the HOA wasn't backing down. Wendy Carson started a campaign in the neighborhood, distributing flyers about the dangerous trespasser who was threatening their community. She posted daily updates on the Facebook group, complete with photos and videos of me riding through the park. She organized a neighborhood watch and encouraged residents to call the police every time they saw me. Officer Martinez called me personally after the 5th complaint in 3 days. "Vincent, I know you're within your rights, but is there any way you can just avoid that area until this gets sorted out? I'm getting tired of driving out there." "I appreciate that, but no. If I stop using the easement, they'll argue that proves I abandoned it." "My attorney says I need to keep using it regularly." He sighed. "All right. I'll talk to the HOA and tell them to stop calling us unless there's an actual emergency." The situation got more ridiculous. Someone from the HOA placed large rocks along the path through the park, trying to block my route. I called Patricia, who immediately sent another letter threatening legal action for interfering with my easement rights. The rocks were removed within 24 hours. Then they tried a different approach. One morning, I arrived at the park section to find they'd installed a fence directly across my path. It was one of those temporary chain-link fences, the kind used at construction sites, but it was locked and clearly meant to stop me. I took photos, sent them to Patricia, and then carefully removed a section of the fence. I made sure not to damage it, just moved it aside so I could pass through and then set it back up behind me. Petty, maybe, but I wasn't going to let them intimidate me out of my legal rights. Wendy Carson was waiting for me when I finished my ride and returned home. She was parked at the end of my driveway, sitting in her Lexus with the engine running. When she saw me, she got out of the car. "We need to talk," she said. I killed my engine and removed my helmet. My attorney said all communication should go through her. "I'm not here as HOA president. I'm here as a neighbor trying to resolve this reasonably." I doubted that, but I was curious what she had to say. "All right, talk. This is destroying our community. People are upset, they're scared, and property values are already starting to drop because of all the conflict." "That's not my problem." Her jaw tightened. "Mr. Ingram, we invested a lot of money into that park. It's the centerpiece of our neighborhood. Surely we can come to some kind of agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "We're prepared to offer you compensation for rerouting your path. We'll pay for a new trail to be cleared on your property, completely around our development. You'll still have access to the back section of your land, just via a different route." "How much compensation?" $5,000. I almost laughed. "My easement is worth a lot more than that, and even if I wanted to give it up, which I don't, you built a $50,000 park on it." "That was your choice, not mine. Be reasonable. You can't expect us to tear down the entire park. I expect you to respect my property rights. Your HOA should have done a proper title search before building anything. The developer assured us everything was clear." "Then you should take it up with the developer. Like I said, not my problem." She stared at me, and I could see her mentally shifting tactics. When she spoke again, her voice had that fake sweetness that people use when they're trying to manipulate you. "Vincent, can I call you Vincent? You seem like a reasonable man. Think about the children. That park is where the neighborhood kids play. Do you really want to be the person who ruins that for them?" "I'm not ruining anything. Your HOA built on my land without permission. That's on you, not me." The fake sweetness evaporated. "Fine. You want to play hardball? We can play hardball. We have resources you can't even imagine. We'll bury you in legal fees until you have nothing left." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm telling you the reality of the situation. You're one person with one attorney. We're an HOA with 230 members, all of whom pay monthly dues that fund our legal defense. How long do you think you can afford to fight us?" I looked at her for a long moment. As long as it takes. Get off my property. She got back in her Lexus and peeled out, throwing gravel from my driveway. That evening, Patricia called me. I just got off the phone with Robert Finch, the HOA's attorney. He's trying to negotiate. Wendy Carson already tried that, offered me $5,000 to give up the easement. He's authorized to go higher. He mentioned $15,000. What do you think? I think they're scared. They know they don't have a legal leg to stand on. The county records clearly show your easement predates their development by over 30 years. If this goes to court, they're going to lose and they'll have to remove everything built on your easement at their own expense. That's why they're trying to buy you out. I don't want to sell. Then don't. But I have to present you with all your options. $15,000 is real money. It's not about the money, it's about principle. They can't just build on my land and then throw money at me to make it okay. All right. Then we keep fighting. The HOA filed a lawsuit 3 days later. They were suing me for property damage, harassment, and creating a public nuisance. The damages they claimed totaled $25,000, which apparently now included emotional distress for the residents. Patricia filed a counter-suit the same week. We were suing the HOA for harassment, attempting to block a legal easement, and demanding the removal of all structures built on my property. We also named Northland Properties Group as a co-defendant, arguing that they had failed to disclose the easement when they sold the land to the HOA. Things got very legal very quickly. There were depositions, document requests, and a seemingly endless stream of paperwork. Patricia handled most of it, but I still had to spend hours going over everything, signing forms, and preparing my testimony. The discovery process revealed some interesting information. Northland Properties had done a title search before developing the land, and my easement had appeared in their records. But someone in their office had marked it as inactive and proceeded with construction plans anyway. There was an internal email chain discussing the easement, with the project manager writing, "It's been decades since anyone used this. We can probably just ignore it and deal with any complaints if they come up." That email alone was enough to make Patricia's eyes light up. This is negligence, maybe even fraud. They knew about the easement and chose to hide it from the HOA. The HOA's attorney clearly saw the same problem. A week after that email surfaced in discovery, Robert Finch called Patricia with a new settlement offer. "They want to drop everything," Patricia told me. "All lawsuits dismissed, no payment from either side, and they'll acknowledge your easement rights. They're going to go after Northland Properties to recover their costs." "What about the park?" "They want to leave it in place and are asking for your permission to maintain it, with the understanding that you have unlimited right to use your easement through it whenever you want." I thought about it. So they're basically asking me to share the space. Essentially, yes. You keep your easement, they keep their park. Everyone moves on with their lives. What if they start harassing me again? We include a clause in the settlement that if they interfere with your easement use in any way, they'll be in violation of the agreement and you can seek damages. It'll make them think twice. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was reasonable. All right, let's do it. The settlement was formalized 2 weeks later. Both lawsuits were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't be refiled. The HOA officially acknowledged my easement in writing, and that acknowledgement was filed with the county. In exchange, I agreed to allow the park structures to remain and to use reasonable care when traveling through the area. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Northland Properties fought back hard against the HOA's lawsuit. They argued that the HOA should have done their own title search and that any failure to identify the easement was the HOA's problem, not theirs. They pointed to language in the original purchase agreement that required the HOA to conduct their own due diligence. The HOA countered with the email evidence showing that Northland had actively concealed the easement. What started as a property dispute turned into a full-blown legal battle between a major development company and a residential HOA. Wendy Carson called me about 3 months after our settlement. She sounded different, tired, and less aggressive. "Mr. Ingram, I want to apologize for how I handled things initially. That caught me off guard." "Okay. I was just trying to protect our neighborhood, but I went about it the wrong way. This whole situation has been a nightmare, and it's made me realize that sometimes being right isn't as important as being fair." "I appreciate that. We're in the middle of litigation with Northland Properties. It's costing us a fortune, even with the insurance covering some of it. Our attorney says we have a good case, but nothing's certain. I hope it works out for you. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Would you be willing to provide a deposition about what happened? Your testimony about the easement and how Northland ignored it could help our case." I talked to Patricia about it first, but she said it was fine since I wasn't a party to that lawsuit anymore. I agreed to give a deposition, and 2 weeks later I spent 4 hours in a conference room answering questions from lawyers. The trial between the HOA and Northland Properties took place the following spring. I wasn't required to attend, but Patricia encouraged me to show up for at least part of it. "You're the linchpin of their whole case," she said. "Your easement is what proves Northland knew about the problem and hid it." The Fairbanks courthouse was busy the day I went. The trial was in its second week, and the courtroom was packed with HOA members and representatives from Northland Properties. I sat in the back and watched as lawyers argued over documents and testimony. The HOA's attorney brought in a land surveyor who had reviewed all the records. He testified that my easement was clearly documented and should have been identified by any competent title search. He also testified that building on an active easement without the owner's permission was a violation of property law. Northland's attorney tried to argue that the easement was so old and unused that it was reasonable to assume it had been abandoned. But then the HOA's attorney introduced the email chain showing that Northland had known about it and decided to proceed anyway. The jury deliberated for 2 days. In the end, they found in favor of the HOA and awarded them nearly $300,000 in damages. That covered the cost of the park, legal fees, and compensation for the decreased property values that had resulted from the ongoing litigation. Northland Properties appealed, of course, but from what Patricia heard through the legal grapevine, the appeal wasn't going well for them. The evidence was just too clear. As for me, life went back to normal. I continued riding my Snowmachine through my easement every morning. The park was actually kind of nice once the snow melted and the trees started to grow. Sometimes I'd see kids playing there, and they'd wave at me as I passed through. Their parents were less enthusiastic, but nobody tried to stop me anymore. Wendy Carson and I developed a weird kind of mutual respect. We weren't friends exactly, but we'd nod to each other if we crossed paths in town. She stepped down as HOA president after the trial, citing stress and health concerns. The new president was a younger guy named Tom, who seemed a lot more laid back about the whole thing. One summer evening, about a year after everything had settled, I was working in my yard when Tom walked up my driveway. He was carrying a 6-pack of beer and had an easy smile on his face. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said. "Thought you might like to have a neighborly drink." I was suspicious at first, but he seemed genuine. We sat on my porch and talked for a couple of hours. He told me about the neighborhood, about the ongoing issues with the HOA trying to rebuild trust after the lawsuit, and about his own plans to make the community more transparent and less confrontational. Wendy meant well, he said. But she had this idea that the HOA needed to be this powerful entity that controlled everything. That's not what most of us wanted. We just wanted a nice place to live. I never had a problem with you guys existing, I said. I just wanted to be left alone to use my own property. I get that now. I think a lot of us do. The whole thing was a learning experience. Before he left, he mentioned that the HOA was considering adding signage to the park explaining the easement and its history. We thought it might be educational, you know. Show people that property rights are complicated and important. I told him I thought that was a good idea. The sign went up a month later. It was tasteful, made of carved wood, and explained that the path through the park was a historic easement dating back to 1987. It included a brief history of the land and a note about respecting property rights. Some of the HOA members complained that it was embarrassing, but Tom held firm. The legal battle between the HOA and Northland Properties finally concluded 2 years after my initial ride through the park. The appeals court upheld the jury's verdict, and Northland was forced to pay the full damages plus additional legal fees that had accumulated during the appeal. The total came to over $400,000. The money allowed the HOA to replenish their reserves and make some improvements to the neighborhood that had been delayed due to the litigation costs. They fixed the roads, upgraded the street lighting, and even added some additional park amenities, though they made very sure nothing else was built on my easement. As for Northland Properties, the case became something of a cautionary tale in Alaska real estate circles. Patricia told me she'd heard about it being used in legal seminars as an example of what happens when developers try to cut corners on due diligence. The project manager who'd written that dismissive email about my easement was quietly let go, and the company implemented new protocols for identifying and disclosing easements. I kept my routine, riding my Snowmachine through the property every winter morning. It became such a familiar sight that parents would tell their kids to watch for the Snowmachine man when they played in the park. Some of the younger kids thought it was exciting, like having a train pass through their neighborhood. One winter morning, about 3 years after the whole mess started, I was making my usual run when I saw a small figure standing right in the middle of my path. I slowed down and realized it was a kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a bright red snowsuit. He was just standing there watching me approach. I came to a stop and idled the engine. "You okay, buddy? Are you Vincent?" he asked. "Yeah, that's me. My dad says you're the reason we learned about easements." He pronounced it carefully like he'd been practicing. "Easements," I corrected gently. "Yeah, I guess I am. He says you were brave for standing up for your rights even when everyone was mad at you." I didn't know what to say to that. Well, sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. The kid nodded seriously, then ran off toward one of the houses, waving back at me. I watched him go, then continued on my way, the engine rumbling beneath me as I traced the same path I'd been riding for 15 years. Life has a funny way of working things out. What started as a simple morning ride turned into a legal battle that cost everyone involved a lot of time, money, and stress. But in the end, justice prevailed. My property rights were protected, the HOA learned a valuable lesson about due diligence, and a negligent developer was held accountable for their actions. I still live on my 40 acres in Fairbanks. The cabin's gotten a few upgrades over the years. Nothing fancy, just practical improvements that make winter life a bit more comfortable. I still work for the mining company, still maintain my property in the summers, and still ride my Snowmachine in the winters. Mountain Ridge estates grew up around me, but we coexist now. The houses are full of families, the park gets plenty of use, and that historic easement sign has become something of a local landmark. Tourists occasionally stop to take pictures of it, especially history buffs interested in property law. Wendy Carson moved away about a year after stepping down as HOA president. I heard she relocated to Arizona, looking for a warmer climate and a fresh start. I don't hold any ill will toward her. She was doing what she thought was right for her community, even if she went about it the wrong way. Tom served as HOA president for 3 years before passing the torch to someone else. He and I still have the occasional beer on my porch, and he's become something of a friend. He tells me that the younger families moving into the neighborhood actually like having the easement there. It gives the place character, makes it feel less like a cookie-cutter subdivision and more like a real community with history. Patricia Holden retired last year. Before she closed her practice, she sent me a thank you note saying that my case had been one of the most satisfying of her career. "It's not often we get such a clear-cut example of justice being served," she wrote. "Thank you for trusting me to represent you. The whole experience taught me something important about standing your ground. There were plenty of times when it would have been easier to just give in, to take the money they offered or find a different route. But easements exist for a reason. Property rights matter. And sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. On quiet mornings when I'm riding through that park, snow flying up behind my machine, I think about how close I came to just avoiding the whole area to keep the peace. If I'd done that, the HOA never would have known about the easement. Northland Properties would have gotten away with their negligence, and I would have lost a right that had been legally mine for decades. Instead, I stood my ground. I dealt with the police calls, the angry confrontations, the legal bills, and the stress of litigation. And in the end, everything worked out the way it should have. The sun was just coming up over the mountains as I finished my ride that morning, 3 years after everything started. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the temperature was hovering around -15. Perfect Alaska winter weather. I parked my Snowmachine in its usual spot, pulled off my helmet, and stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold air and watching the light change across the snow. My property stretched out before me, 40 acres of Alaska wilderness that I'd worked hard to maintain and protect. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of Mountain Ridge estates waking up. Garage doors opening, cars starting, kids getting ready for school, life going on in its normal rhythm. And cutting right through the middle of it all was my easement, that 20-foot wide path that represented something bigger than just a route through the snow. It represented the rule of law, the importance of property rights, and the idea that standing up for yourself matters, even when it's difficult. I walked into my cabin, stomping snow off my boots at the door. The wood stove was still putting out good heat from the morning's fire, and my coffee pot was waiting on the counter. I poured myself a cup and sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd first showed Officer Martinez my property documents 3 years ago. The whole thing seemed almost surreal now, looking back on it. How a simple morning ride had turned into such a complex legal battle. How a routine that I'd done for years suddenly became the center of a neighborhood controversy. How standing up for my rights had ultimately led to justice being served and a major development company being held accountable. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Derek at the planning office. "Hey man, wanted to let you know we've updated our protocols for new developments. Every plat has to go through 3 levels of easement verification now. Your case made a real difference." I smiled and texted back a thanks. It felt good to know that something positive had come out of all the chaos. Maybe the next property owner wouldn't have to go through what I'd gone through. Maybe developers would think twice before ignoring inconvenient easements. Maybe HOAs would do better due diligence before building expensive amenities. The morning light was streaming through my windows now, bright and clear. I finished my coffee and looked at the clock. Time to get ready for work. The mining company had a big project starting up, and they needed experienced operators like me to keep things running smoothly. As I gathered my things and prepared to head out, I took one last look at those property documents still sitting in their folder on the counter. They'd been through a lot with me, those papers. Examined by lawyers, presented to judges, copied and filed and referenced countless times. But they'd done their job. They'd proven what was rightfully mine, and that in the end was what mattered most. Not the drama, not the conflict, not even the victory in court. What mattered was that the truth had won out. Justice had been served, and a man's right to use his own property had been upheld. I grabbed my work jacket and headed out the door, ready to face whatever the day might bring. Behind me, my easement cut through the snow, a visible reminder that sometimes the smallest path can lead to the biggest victories. And somewhere in Mountain Ridge Estates, kids were probably already bundling up to play in that park, running across the same ground where I'd fought to maintain my rights. They'd grow up knowing that path was there, understanding that property rights matter, and maybe, just maybe, learning that standing up for what's right is always worth the effort. The story could have ended differently. I could have given in to the pressure, accepted a buyout, or simply found another route to avoid the conflict. But I didn't, and because of that, something important was preserved. Not just my easement, but the principle behind it. As I drove to work that morning, passing through downtown Fairbanks and out toward the mining site, I thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by this situation. The HOA members who'd learned about the importance of due diligence. The Northland Properties employees who'd learned that cutting corners has consequences. The lawyers and judges who'd worked to ensure justice was served. The neighbors who'd come to understand that property rights, even inconvenient ones, deserve respect. And me, Vincent Ingram, just a guy trying to live his life on his 40 acres in Alaska. I'd learned something too. I'd learned that fighting for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worthwhile. I'd learned that the legal system, for all its flaws, can work when the facts are clear and people are willing to stand their ground. And I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but simply the satisfaction of knowing justice has been served. The snow continued to fall as winter deepened in Fairbanks. Every morning I rode my Snowmachine through my easement, and every morning it reminded me of everything that had happened. The police sirens, the confrontations, the legal battles, and ultimately, the victory. But more than that, it reminded me of something fundamental about America, about property rights, and about the importance of standing up for yourself. This country was built on the idea that people have rights that can't be taken away simply because it's inconvenient for someone else. My case was a small example of that principle in action, but it mattered. Years from now, long after I'm gone, that easement will still be there. The records will still show that it exists, that it was fought for and preserved. And maybe some future property owner will be glad that I didn't back down, that I stood my ground and made sure those rights were protected. That's worth more than any settlement offer, more than any amount of peace and quiet, more than avoiding conflict. It's worth everything. The sun climbed higher in the sky as I worked that day, operating heavy machinery and moving earth at the mining site. Physical work, honest work, the kind that makes you tired but satisfied at the end of the day. When my shift ended, I drove back home, back to my cabin and my land and my easement that cut through Mountain Ridge Estates. And as I pulled into my driveway, I saw Tom standing there waiting for me. He waved, and I could see he had that same easy smile on his face. "Got a minute?" he asked as I got out of my truck. "Sure, what's up?" "The HOA wanted me to give you this." He handed me a small plaque, beautifully made from polished wood and brass. It read, "To Vincent Ingram for standing up for property rights and teaching our community the importance of due diligence. With respect and appreciation, Mountain Ridge Estates HOA." I stared at it, genuinely surprised. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. We just wanted you to know that we get it now. What you did wasn't about being difficult or causing problems. It was about protecting something important. We respect that." I invited him in for a beer, and we sat on my porch as the sun set over the mountains, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. The conflict was over, the battles were won, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. That plaque now hangs on my wall, right next to my framed property deed. It's a reminder of what happened, but more importantly, it's a reminder of what's possible when people stand up for their rights and when communities learn from their mistakes. The story of how an HOA called the police on me for riding my Snowmachine through their yard, only to discover they'd built on my easement, became something of a legend in Fairbanks. People still talk about it at the local bar, lawyers still reference it in property disputes, and new HOA board members are apparently told about it as a cautionary tale. But for me, it's just part of my life now. Part of who I am and what I've done. I'm Vincent Ingram, the guy who stood up to an HOA and a development company and won. The guy who proved that property rights matter, even in the face of intimidation and legal threats. And every morning when I ride my Snowmachine through that easement, cutting through the park that tried to erase my rights, I'm reminded that justice isn't just an abstract concept. It's real, it's achievable, and it's worth fighting for. The winter wind picked up as evening settled in, carrying snow across my property in gentle waves. Inside my cabin, warm and comfortable, I looked at that plaque one more time and smiled. The whole crazy journey had been worth it. Every moment of stress, every dollar spent on legal fees, every confrontation with Wendy Carson, had led to this moment of peace and vindication. Tomorrow I'll wake up, make my coffee, and ride my Snowmachine through my easement again. And the day after that, and the day after that. Because that's my right, earned and defended and preserved for the future. That's my legacy, a 20-foot wide path through the snow that represents something much bigger than itself, and I wouldn't change a single thing about how it all turned out.